Thank you, Alison and Manny, for having me here. I'm here on behalf of Annette Dixon, my vice president, to send her regrets. And I was very happy that she couldn't come because I had the opportunity to be part of a fantastic discussion. So many congratulations to you, Alison, Manny, and your teams for putting together a fantastic day. It was so rich that, of course, I won't attempt to summarize it. But I'll just speak to three things that spoke to me very powerfully today. The first one, I was very taken by Santiago's point on needing to think very carefully about the theory of change and the production function from research, production of evidence, communication of evidence, and policy change. This felt very close to home because in the past year and a half, as you might or might not know, in the Human Development Practice Group, we launched the Human Capital Project, and we produced, in cooperation with the research group, the Human Capital Index. So the Human Capital Index is a very simple metric that puts together 5 measures which were available out there, almost all of them, about survival, stunting, learning, and health, to raise the visibility and the conversation around the need to invest in human capital. So looking backwards and thinking about the theory of change, I think we got quite a few things right. The fact that it was simple, I think along what Ngozi was saying, and many of you were saying, spoke powerfully to our counterparts. The fact that these numbers were verifiable, we didn't model anything. They were out there to say, you know, we can check with you. We have checked with you that these numbers are the ones we could believe. Really brought home a lot of buy-in and ownership. The tough call now is how to translate this salience into action. And that's a tough job that the Human Capital Project has. And I hope that we together as a community within the bank and outside can work together to make this a reality. What we see now is that there's been increased demand for data and measurement, and we see this as in a very positive light. What was interesting to me is to see that we see demand for data and information that we know is already out there. Things that are very simple, like how do we disaggregate this index by socioeconomic status? The information about how to disaggregate enrollment in socioeconomic status is out there everywhere. But what we see that made a difference was the salience of putting it up there for the ministers of finance to discuss. So on this, stay tuned, and maybe at the next conference we can talk about how we went with the Human Capital Project. The second point that spoke to me very closely was how nicely and in such a nuanced way Alison, Manny, and many of you put citizens' accountability and participation in the broader picture of governance. I feel that with the index we went the long road towards accountability, better service, and better outcomes, trying to really elevate the conversation with the Minister of Finance. And now our challenge is really how to make it trickle down to where the actual decisions that matter for us are being made. But with another initiative, which is called the Service Delivery Indicator Surveys, which is a partnership between the Hewlett Foundation, the AERC, and the World Bank, we have, over the past 9 years, collected information about the experience of the average citizen when at the point of contact with a school or with a health post. And these surveys are nationally representative. They measure absenteeism, they measure the knowledge of service provider, they measure whether the schools actually have all the material, the textbooks, the desks, if there is running water, if there is electricity. We saw that these surveys have spurred a lot of change, from trade unions really talking about what's wrong with the preparation of teachers to big programs like the big results now in Tanzania. And I hope that you at 3IE and us as the community of researchers and practitioners can use this for not only for measurement and tracking of results, but also for experimentation in a way that is both rigorous but also adaptive. And lastly, what stayed with me is the pragmatic optimism of Ngozi and her words, and not last, what it takes to really take on and fight something as vicious as corruption. And clearly the answer is to have a father who's an economist. So thank you very much.
Nicely said. Well, I won't delay too much, but I wanted to make a few reflections myself, and then I'll pass over to Manny. I think he'll also do some thank yous to all those who have helped put today together, which I know was a major feat. Just to let you know, I'm going to congratulate all of you. It took us 35 minutes to mention Brexit. Which I reckon is pretty good going in current times, given how much it's part of my life at the moment. I feel I've done my own personal Brexit coming to DC, but really that wasn't quite how it was meant to be. Look, a few points to make. I mean, I've learnt a lot today, and lots of the comments and reflections have fed into my own view about where I would also like to take IEG over the coming period. And here's just a few things that I've been thinking about. I think Lily's point this morning about we need to build more houses feeds very much into my feelings about needing to build connections between evaluations, to start looking for patterns and regularities, for scale implications, and to move beyond the idea that every evaluation needs to completely stand on its own merit, but to start thinking about evaluation as contributing to bigger stories of change, and kind of getting over this tendency for us to polarize ourselves in whichever methodological camp you sit, but thinking much more about how we can integrate methodologies to really build strong evaluative pictures that speak to the issues that not just policymakers, but crucially citizens are occupied with. Another point which reflects a little bit Rebecca's intervention, but also very much Santiago's discussion this morning about the production function, if you like, the evidence to policy production function. And I worked and led a think tank for a number of years, and we were completely obsessed with trying to understand the policy process and entry points and all the rest of it. And, after a lot of time trying to do that, all we could conclude is that actually, in all the ways you think evidence should influence policy making are all the ways it often doesn't. And sometimes it's the least expected ways in which evidence actually begins to move the needle and change people's minds. So we should never give up, I think, as evaluators, as evidence producers, of trying to influence, but we do need to clearly understand the political economy of how decisions are made. We need to understand that there are information asymmetries between the generators and users of evidence. There are non-linearities, if you like, around the policy process. We do need to get smarter about understanding that. And here, even within this world that is the World Bank Group, we in IG also need to get smart about those things to see how we can use our stock of evaluations to be even more effective in supporting change across the organisation. I think the challenge, which we haven't spent much time today talking about, but which presents, is there for all of us, is about what all that looks like in a world where actually, big data is now very much part of our universe, and also methodologies like machine learning based methodologies that are likely to sweep away some of the old ways of doing business. How we understand that and use that smartly and effectively is a big challenge. Finally, the point about theories of change, again, you mentioned that. I mean, I think we, in IG have a history of theory-based evaluation, but I heard very much today a whole number of examples, I think, about where we need to be very reflective about our theories, how we construct them, who they're about, what they focus on. I think the citizen engagement lens is a really effective one for us to check in, to interrogate our own assumptions, and also to make sure that we're looking for alternative theories. There's never one theory. There are alternatives. And to Danny's point about embracing uncertainty, which is something I feel strongly about, I mean, I think I've come to the view that as evaluators, I'd rather we were right 40% of the time than wrong 60% of the time. I think we've got to be thinking about, we can't always completely assess our universe, but we can make a good enough assessment that can be valuable. And going for 100% proof, if you like, and being right all of the time is probably not that realistic. Finally, a couple of uncomfortable things that perhaps have emerged today. I think one is about the whole field of citizen engagement and accountable government, which is that we're living in very polarised and polarising times, and not all aspects of citizen engagement are comfortable, are actually easy to embrace. There's quite a lot of fear and anger and anxiety out there, and we have to acknowledge that we probably need to take our rose-tinted glasses off a bit and not always assume that more engagement leads to better outcomes. I think we also need to recognise that the speed of decision making is such that sometimes we're bound to be always running behind, and I think finding ways to be faster while not losing sight of our rigour is just the order of the day, really. And then finally, to Santiago's very interesting anecdote this morning, some messages are just going to be always very hard to communicate. And maybe the thing I've taken away today is that 10 is never going to be less than 4. That's really helpful. So thank you. I'm going to pass over to Melanie.
Well, I've got a 50 PowerPoint slides I wanted to show you at the end of the day, but no. I mean, how can you? There's not much more left for me to say. There are just a couple of things. I'll reflect on the excellent summaries that Roberta and Alison have given that really just complement what you both have said, and then I do want you to stay for some thank yous. So, like Alison, I learned an awful lot today, but I was also inspired, and that's really something that I'll take away from the day. I think both of you and have mentioned about this really powerful need for us to change our mindset as evaluators about what now is the production function for learning. And I think it's going to be tough for some of us. I'm an economist, and when I was trained to think up what policies to recommend, we were taught about how to, in our public finance courses, how to come up with the optimal policies, and the construct was that of a benevolent dictator, okay? That all we had to do was come up with a series of what is the optimal tax rate, what is the optimal expenditure rate, and then all you need to do was place it in front of the policymaker, and they'll get it done. And we all know that that is wrong, and that the kind of things that we learned today about the need to take stakeholders into account, the need to ensure that maybe it's not only the policymakers who should get the information, but a whole range of people, and to be transparent with our data are certainly things that I'll take away. But I must admit, for me, it's a challenge, because it's not the way that we normally think. The other thing that I think people have said about is the need to make sure that we need to communicate well is really very important. I think you all know that, to make our evidence not only digestible, but what I heard, it has to be appetizing. That we need to attract people to it. And not only that, but we need to actually eat it with them and help them to consume it. People talked about knowledge translation, and that perhaps we actually need to have a team that is not only technical, but we need to bring in experts who know how to do this. And that's something that certainly I think those of a 3IE will try to bring. And the last thing I just want to say is that especially on citizen engagement and accountability, is that you need to be really aware of what people have called ecosystems. Some people hate that word because they don't really know what it means. But I do think that we need to have different perspectives, and maybe a bit more courage than it would take in other sectors. People have said bet on the accountant, but also make sure that you have people who are willing to stand up and to powers that may not be taking your evidence too kindly. So those are just three things that I take away. But before you go, let me express our thanks collectively to a whole bunch of people who were responsible for the day. And I personally want to thank all of you, because there are a lot of us here either from the World Bank, but also a lot of alumni from the World Bank, as you may have guessed. And this was a bit of a homecoming for many of us. It's been an incredibly warm experience. Thank you for not making us wear the tags of class of, because we didn't want to date ourselves. But it was really great to see people who we haven't been in contact with for a while. First, sort of thanks, and I want to group this into three. And I want to ask you to join me in an applause for each group. The first is thanks to Allison, Brenda, IEG for partnering with us to make this event possible. There are a whole bunch of names here, but special thanks to Javier Lanza and Zoraida Buko Opana for their great help in the logistics, and also to make sure that we learned as efficiently as possible. Of course, Brenda, for her great work to lead that team. And I'm just going to mention a whole lot of names, some of whom I know, some of whom I don't, and that we ought to thank. Deng Opana, Nishi Bhatnagar, Victor Beltran, Ashik Raman, Kirsten McMullen, Esperanza Sadiua, Elena Bardasi, Gisela Garcia, Chris Nelson, Yezena Yomer, Gilpana Surya, and Juicy Qureshi Hook. So, word of applause for everyone. Let me now thank our team in 3IE, who's been led by our Washington team here, but also really impelled by our management team, just Marie Barrel and Hitesh, but really David here was in our Washington office has taken the lead. Bridget Monahan, Preeti Srihanathan, Marie-Eve Ogier, Anka Dimitriou, Eleanor Dickens, Jorge Miranda, and Bharat Koshish from our Delhi office, who really was bridging the miles between Delhi and Washington. So please join me in thanking them. The last group and the final group I need to thank is our speakers and all of you who have come from afar. Many have come from afar, many from a little closer in, but have really enriched this conversation. And without you, of course, the learning wouldn't have taken place. So thank you for engaging so well, as Allison had asked us to do in the beginning. And you all deserve the reception that you're going to get. So thank you very much.